Next, on Pennsylvania Newsmakers, we'll explore news headlines from the state capitol with our reporter roundtable. But first, Governor Shapiro says he wants to legalize recreational marijuana and is calling for a bill to get it done right now. We'll talk with the leader of Pennsylvania's Cannabis Coalition to see if she's optimistic if it will happen. All next on Pennsylvania Newsmakers.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host.
Hello, I'm Steve Aaron, this week's guest host on Pennsylvania Newsmakers. In his third budget proposal, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro is again calling for the legalization of recreational marijuana. Will the third time be the charm, or will it go up in smoke? Let's hear from Governor Shapiro directly from his recent budget address.
Letting this business operate in the shadows, it doesn't make sense. And by doing nothing, we are making Pennsylvania less competitive. Besides, let's not kid ourselves here. Pennsylvanians who want to buy cannabis, they're just driving across the border to one of our neighbors.
I'm delighted to welcome our guest into the studio.
Thanks, Steve.
Meredith Buettner Schneider, the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Cannabis Coalition. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me today.
So, what do you think? Are we going to get this done? Is this the year that it happens?
We're really optimistic about getting it done this year, Steve. I know the governor has proposed it 3 times now. We're hoping that the third time's the charm. This is the first time in the last couple years that we've really had a need for revenue when we're talking about the budget. And without raising taxes on Pennsylvanians, adult use cannabis is a great place to look for revenue.
So we heard the governor talk about Pennsylvania's losing to other states. Talk to us a little bit about that. How many states are around us have already legalized this, and what are we losing to those states?
Sure. So all of our neighbors, with the exception of West Virginia, have adult use cannabis. 40% of our population lives within a half-an-hour drive of a legal state, right? So in the eastern side of the state, folks are driving to New Jersey, Maryland, Ohio, New York. All of those states have legalized cannabis. And one of the things we heard the governor say is when you talk to those business owners in those other states, they're seeing a lot of Pennsylvanians come to those states to get legal cannabis. One of the downsides of that, besides losing the revenue, is that we're getting the problems without any of the benefits, right? So folks are going to those other states to purchase cannabis, coming back to Pennsylvania, and we haven't given the Commonwealth any of the resources that they need to deal with any of the ramifications of that.
It's interesting. It's a similar argument we heard years ago with slots at the racetracks, right? That we were losing the revenue. People were playing the slots, and you flash forward all these years later, and now we have gambling across Pennsylvania. It was a similar argument. We were losing that tax revenue to other states.
And as generally been considered successful and has come to the Commonwealth without a lot of issues. And I think very similarly, we can bring adult use cannabis legalization to Pennsylvania in a very similar manner.
So I know we have had medicinal marijuana in Pennsylvania, I think, for 7 years now. What have we learned from that experience that translates to what needs to be done to take it to the next step?
Sure. So I think one of the most important things we've learned here in Pennsylvania is that with enough access, you can pull folks into a legal regulated market. Here in Pennsylvania, we have 30 plus companies producing safe, regulated medicinal cannabis. We have 189 dispensaries for folks to access that cannabis. And we have 450,000 Pennsylvanians seeking relief via medical cannabis here in the Commonwealth. So if you build it, they will come, I think, is something that we've learned from this. And something that is really different than what our neighbors did, right? A lot of our neighboring states did not have the same type of infrastructure that we have in Pennsylvania. So that puts us in a position to build on this regulated system that we built under a medical program and really roll it right into an adult use program.
Why do you think we haven't gotten it done to this point? What have been the impediments? I've seen some surveys that you've done that shows that Pennsylvanians do largely support this. Why haven't we gotten it done, do you think?
So I think there's a lot of things. I think at the end of the day, it's politics, right? And everything kind of comes down to that. We've been in a really interesting position for, the last legislative cycle with having a divided legislature. We're one of the only divided legislatures in the country, and that brings really unique challenges. I also think we have a lot of other big challenges in Pennsylvania right now. We are still talking about the debate about the minimum wage, right? We're still trying to solve other fundamental issues here in Pennsylvania. So where does legalizing cannabis fall, in the priority when we're having that discussion? So as we see a need for new revenue sources, I think the opportunity for cannabis to move up that list increases.
Great. Let's take a break there because I do want to talk with you about this budget cycle and what might need to happen to get it done.
Great.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more after this.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
We're continuing our conversation with Meredith Buettner Schneider, the executive director of the Pennsylvania Cannabis Coalition. So I want to pick up on the conversation of why hasn't it happened yet? So the governor in his budget address said, if you give me a piece of legislation, I'll sign it. Where's the problem developing right now? I see some legislators are saying, well, we'd like to see the legislation come from the governor's office. He'd like to see it come from the legislature. What has to happen to get this to the next stage? Who has to make the next move here?
Right. So we need a piece of legislation that can get out of a democratically controlled House, go over to a Republican-controlled Senate, back to the Democratic House, and then to the governor's desks. So who should start that bill? Right. That's I think our biggest question. So we've seen some work done in the House. I think there's varying opinions about what that bill should look like. How should we approach adult use cannabis here in the Commonwealth? And I think that's really the debate that we're having as we go into this budget cycle. I think once we can answer the question about what the best fit for a cannabis protocol is for Pennsylvania, that we'll be able to see something move. I do think that in a divided legislature, there is an opportunity for the administration to lead here. And I think that the governor sending us sending the legislature a bill that really lays out his vision for adult use cannabis for the Commonwealth would be a great place to start. In the absence of that, I think it's up to the Democratic House to get a bill together that they not only can get 102, maybe 110 votes for, but something that the Republicans will actually consider when it gets over to them. Right? We don't want to see the Democrats send over a bill to the Senate that just dies. That doesn't get us anywhere. So we really have to get a bill that's right, that fits that sweet spot, that can end up on that coveted trade list when we get to really the nitty-gritty of the budget.
So there were Republican lawmakers last year who introduced legislation. Are those bills kind of in play? Could they be reintroduced as part of this debate and conversation?
Sure. We just saw Senator Street and from Erie, Senator Laughlin, I just messed up, sorry. Senator Street from Philadelphia and Senator Laughlin. It's a big state. They're from opposite sides. That's
right.
So bipartisan senators from opposite sides of the state introduced a co-sponsorship memo a couple weeks ago. So we're really excited to see that. They both have been leading on this issue for a long time. Last cycle, we also saw bipartisan introduction of a bill in the House. We're hopeful that we'll see bipartisan introduction of a bill in the House again. And I think when you have both chambers and both caucuses talking about an issue, you really have an opportunity to get something done.
Does the fact that cannabis is still criminalized at the federal level, does that play into this? Does it create any hesitancy among certain lawmakers saying, until that's resolved, how do we legalize it here?
Yeah, and I really think that's a red herring. I really think it's an excuse not to do something. We've seen 24 other states legalize cannabis without losing their federal funding. You know, their highways are still getting repaired, all of those things. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous to hang our hat on that. Now, rescheduling has to get done for a lot of reasons, including some of the other things that prevent us from advancing the cannabis conversation. Rescheduling could really benefit us in the research path when it's related to cannabis, solving some of these other issues that make folks hesitate. It also would open up paths for banking and investment and things like that. So I do think it's something that we need to get done. Do I think it should be reason number 1, 2, or 3 to not legalize cannabis here in the Commonwealth? No, I don't think it should be.
So we just have about 30, 45 seconds left.
Okay.
If Governor Shapiro were sitting here right now, what would be your words of encouragement to him on how to get this done?
24 other states have done this before. All of our neighbors have done this. All of our neighbors have actually done this fairly well. There's some lessons to learn from some hiccups in New York, but folks like New Jersey, Maryland, Ohio have really thriving cannabis markets. And I think if we look to our neighbors and we lean on the resources that are available to us and build on the infrastructure of the medical marijuana programs, the medical marijuana program here in Pennsylvania, that Pennsylvania could lead on legalization in this country and be seen as a really successful rollout of adult use cannabis.
Okay, that'll have to be our last word. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. We're going to continue the conversation on marijuana and other topics from the Capitol with our Reporter Roundtable coming up next.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. We are fortunate to have many outstanding journalists covering the state capitol, and we are delighted that 2 of them could be with us today to talk about what's happening in our capital city. Really pleased to welcome Gilliam McGoldrick, who covers state government for the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. And Justin Sweitzer, the managing editor for City and State Pennsylvania.
Glad to be here.
Great to have you both. So let's pick up on the last conversation with Meredith about marijuana, legalizing marijuana. Gillian, I'll start with you. Does the governor need to step up and put a bill out in front in order to get this done? That's what we hear from some lawmakers. Does he need to lead in order to get this done, based on what you're hearing?
Yeah. President Pro Tem Kim Ward, the top Republican in the state Senate, has said that she wants to see him lead on whatever issue he wants to get done. And as Meredith said, it is a potential revenue driver, though I do think that there are some legitimate questions about how much money it will really bring into the state. In last year's budget, he had assumed it would be only like $14.8 million that would come into the state in the first year. Now he's assuming his budget secretary is estimating that it will be more than $500 million, which is a huge increase, mostly because of different like licensing, et cetera. That's where they say they get that number. But still, there's a lot of money that the state needs to make up this year to avoid raising taxes. There's a $4.5 billion budget gap going forward, so we'll see.
Justin, how much of a priority do you think this issue will be as we head towards the end of June and budget season?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will definitely be a topic of conversation. I think one of the driving issues behind cannabis legalization is probably going to be the structural deficit. As Gillian mentioned, over the next several years, it could fluctuate between $4.5 billion to $7.5 billion based on certain projections. So, I think that's going to be an argument you hear a lot from proponents, is we have this big gap between revenues and expenditures, and we need to figure out a way to manage that, whether it's the new revenue sources like cannabis or skill games, or whether it's trimming expenses where that can be done.
Meredith talked about just the unique situation we have with the divided legislature and how do we get things done, where do things start. So who has to make the first move here? Who's most likely, I guess, to say to make the first move to get it done? Do you have any sense of that?
I think to Jillian's point, I think it might need to be Democrats here because, Senate Republicans who control that chamber have been a little wary of this issue. I know Senator Scott Martin, he's the appropriations chair for the Senate Appropriations Committee. He's been a little reluctant. I believe he said he's not confident that he sees this getting done or getting through his caucus. So, I think the Republican caucus is going to be the sticking point, and I think it's probably either going to have to be something that, a product that Shapiro puts forward or, House Dems make a big priority.
Gillian, pulling back to other issues, what are some of you think would be the major points of discussion during budget season that would impact Pennsylvanians? What should we be keeping our eye out for about, items that are likely to be up for debate here over the next few months?
Yeah, I think that there will definitely be a lot of them. And the budget gap, the $4.5 billion budget gap being the number one. They are going to spend more than they bring in starting this year, and significantly spend more than they expected. So I think that there will be a lot of conversations about marijuana. There will be conversations about skill games, like Justin mentioned, as another potential revenue driver. And then also there are some other issues that have been following Governor Shapiro through his other two budget negotiations. I think that we will hear a lot about school choice again. We will hear about school voucher proposals, et cetera. And I think that we're geared up for a long summer.
Likely some trading that'll have to happen, right, for certain priorities. If you want this, we need this, right? And the school choice could end up being a part of that discussion. You think, is that likely?
I could definitely see it. I would also expect, given how much of a priority Governor Shapiro has made it, I could see some energy policy reforms being a part of the ultimate product too. Shapiro has really pushed his Lightning plan. It's a broad, right, 6-part plan that would make a lot of changes to energy in the Commonwealth. And I know Republicans have expressed a desire to make some progress on, changes to our grid that increase reliability. So I wouldn't be surprised if energy is, a big issue area in this budget.
We're going to pause right there. We'll continue our conversation with these reporters right after this.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania American Water. We keep life flowing across the Keystone State.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. We're continuing our conversation with our reporter roundtable. Justin, I wanted to switch from Harrisburg to D.C. Obviously, there's been a lot of focus on Elon Musk's efforts around DOGE and government efficiency. Pennsylvania's 2 U.S. senators have sort of taken different tracks on this. I think Senator McCormick has largely been very supportive of those efforts. Senator Fetterman has been supportive in a way, but also has indicated he's seeing a lot of chaos that's being created. What are you seeing about how this is going to play out for Pennsylvania writ large with their legislators?
Yeah, I think we're seeing legislators at the congressional and Senate levels, approach this with a bit of caution, and I think that's definitely true in Fetterman's case. I actually spoke with him a couple of weeks ago, and he, paraphrasing, said to me, that if there are efficiencies that he can agree on with Musk and DOGE, like he's open to having those discussions. But we've also seen him getting back and forth with Elon Musk on Twitter and through other means, and he has pointed to chaos and confusion, whether it's been some of these federal firings and layoffs, whether it's just the spending slashing. So I think Fetterman's a little cautious. I think, to your point, McCormick seemed a little more open. I believe he's pretty on board with this. I think he made a comment where he doesn't want to see any quote dumb things happen or get cut as a result. So I do think you're seeing overall a cautious approach from the senators. I think when you look into the House delegation a little more. I think Democrats are a little more opposed and concerned about this broader DOJ effort. I know this week to the president's joint address, several Democrats fired federal workers to point to be like, hey, here's a real world effect of what these cuts mean for people. So I think it depends on where you are in the political spectrum,
right.
And I think especially in the Senate representing the entire state, it seems like there's a cautious but open-minded approach from both of them.
So in regards to those federal employees, just this week, Governor Shapiro signed an executive order looking to, I think, encourage some of those fired federal employees to find employment in Pennsylvania. Can you tell a little bit about what he's trying to accomplish with that executive order, Gillian?
Yeah. So Governor Shapiro just on Wednesday, signed an executive order asking telling state agencies that they should essentially look at fired federal employees or federal employees, people with federal experience generally, the same way that they look at state employees or people with state experience when they are evaluating their application. They're essentially pre-qualified. But his executive order was a little bit more targeted. It's not like he was creating new jobs for these federal workers. He says that he wants them to apply to some of the 5,600 open jobs in Pennsylvania right now. So we'll see how that plays out. He's not the only governor who has done something in regard to helping out or acknowledging the public service of federal workers. The governor of Maryland, Governor Westmore, has also done similar to Governor Shapiro, Governor Hochul in New York. So we've seen it a little bit here.
Do you both get the sense that this might be the beginning of a trend for Governor Shapiro, that he's going to have to spend more of his time kind of pushing back what's happening in Washington, right? He holds a press conference particularly about DOJ and what's happening there. But do you get the sense as he starts to campaign for re-election that more of his time is going to have to be spent kind of pushing back on things that are coming out of Washington?
I wouldn't be surprised. And, if you look at his tenure in the Attorney General's office, that was a big focal point of his terms was, just being a backstop against the Trump administration and being someone who pushes back against Trump. So I wouldn't be surprised, and while it's a bit of a different role, to see him push back where he can. And I would not be shocked if he positions himself during the campaign cycle, whether it's for governor or whether it's for something else in the future. I wouldn't be surprised if he uses this as a campaign issue to show how he seeking to protect Pennsylvanians.
Gillian, do you see the same?
Yeah, definitely. He has said that he will work with President Trump if it is going to benefit Pennsylvanians. It's a different tone than he took when he was Attorney General, when he was frequently suing the administration. It's part of this larger landscape for Democrats is they're really not sure how to approach a second Trump administration. But so far, Governor Shapiro has been very strategic in where he has spoken up about President Trump and something that he disagrees with, whether it's his disagreement with tariffs announced by the president on Canada and Mexico, right, or some of the federal freeze of federal funding.
Got it.
So all the things.
Got it.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off, but we're out of time. Thank you both for joining us. It was great to have you with us. And thanks for everybody being with us at Pennsylvania Newsmakers. We'll see you next time.